For music in the 19th century to the 20th and 21st centuries includes the Modernist era and Postmodern era. So let's talk about first the Modernist era. It was an aesthetic stance underlying the development and diversity of musical language. This era also explored untraditional sounds and based their musics on rhythm, texture, and tone, rather than the traditional aspects of melody and harmony. This era also caused the rapid changes in musical style and expanding our knowledge in music from other cultures, further rapidly changing music while providing a wider range of music for the listeners, composers, and performers. Throughout the Modernist era, different styles thrived and flourished within this movement, giving us so much more sense of the art of music. We have Impressionism, Expressionism, and Neoclassicism movements. Impressionism was estimated to have occurred in the 1890s to the 1920s. The music was a movement among composers in the Western classical music, whose music focused on the mood and emotions aroused by the subject, rather than the details of the music. In conclusion, tone color, atmosphere, and fluidity were the important characteristics to define Impressionist music. The ever so famous example of Impressionist music is Prelude of the Faun by Claude Debussy. The Expressionism movement was during the early 1900s to the 1930s. It was said that the term was originally coined from visual arts and literature. Artists created vivid pictures, distorting colors and shapes, making unrealistic images that suggest strong emotions. For music, Expressionist composers poured intense emotion into their works and explored the subconscious mind, using high level of dissonance, extreme contrast dynamics, changing textures, distorted melodies and harmonies, taking wild leaps. For example, we have the music of Arnold Schoenberg, Pierre Lunaire. Like the painter Wassily Kandinsky, he avoided the traditional form of beauty to convey powerful emotions into his work. Lastly, for the Modernist era, we have the Neoclassicism movement. The Neoclassicism movement was a 20th century trend. It was occurrent in the interwar period. Because of this, composers sought to return to the aesthetic concept of broadly defined classicism, namely clarity, economy, and emotional restraint. A famous composer in this movement is Igor Stravinsky, with his works Pulcinella and The Octet. Let's move on to the postmodern era, in which music follows an aesthetic and philosophical trend of postmodernism. The term postmodernism is defined as a creative aesthetic, as seen in the artworks approximately in the 1950s to the present. With genre mixing, irony, and humor, and exploration of the surface characteristics of artworks, it is often used to identify the composition. Within this era, we have the experimental, minimalism, and post-minimalism movements. First, we have the experimental music. It is a term in the field in music making. It is widely accepted but not properly defined as the term experimental. It was skyrocketing in the mid-20th century to describe a range of cultural and modernist compositional techniques, and it has a lot of improvisation built on it to experiment the very essence of musical beauty. Upon comparing the timeline of musical genres, the birth of rock and roll was within this movement. We have Chuck Berry's hit single Roll Over Beethoven and Richie Valens' La Bamba. Many genres will also hit the record like country, traditional pop, rhythm and blues, and jazz. And many beloved artists sprung from this movement, like the Everly Brothers, Tony Bennett, and Elvis Presley. Now we have the minimalism music. It was during in the 1950s 1950s to the 1990s. It is an art music that took incredibly complex music into multiple patterns and textures and interweaved them into new and complex ways. It was a very public, popular, and highly visible movement that during this movement, contemporary folk music thrived, and in the early 70s was the start of rap and hip-hop, and punk rock into the later years, and many more genres. The diversity of music within this movement gave rise to famous people, like the Beatles, that dominated the charts with the British invasion. We have Frank Sinatra, ABBA, Elton John, The Carpenters, and Michael Jackson in the 1980s, and of course, Lionel Richie. So there you have it, the history of music. As music is dynamic and has evolved during these movements, it is still changing and will still change throughout time.